I was sitting in a coffee shop last March, and I noticed the barista's left hand trembling slightly as she poured my oat milk latte. Then I noticed the couple behind me hadn't spoken in 11 minutes. Then I noticed the fluorescent light above the register was flickering at a slightly different frequency than the one near the bathroom. And then I noticed I was noticing all of this instead of reading the book I'd brought, which I had opened 17 minutes ago to the same page. I closed it, stared at the wall, and thought, my brain will not shut up about things that have nothing to do with me. That impulse, the inability to stop processing, has a name. Several, actually. And the psychology behind it explains why some people can walk through a crowded room and feel nothing, while others absorb every micro-expression, every shift in tone, every barely perceptible flicker of mood, and carry it home like luggage. In the 1990s, psychologists Dr. Elaine Aron and Dr. Arthur Aron began studying what they called sensory processing sensitivity. Their research, built on a 27-item self-report questionnaire published in 1997, identified a trait found in roughly 20% of humans and over 100 other species. A latent class analysis by Leonetti, using 2 samples totaling nearly 1,000 participants, sorted people into low, medium, and highly sensitive groups, with about 31% landing in the high category. The highly sensitive aren't just emotionally reactive, their brains work differently at a hardware level. In 2014, functional brain imaging research found that highly sensitive people had consistently higher activity in regions tied to social and emotional processing, and this elevated activity kicked in even when they were looking at photos of strangers. Dr. Bianca Acevedo at UC Santa Barbara later published findings in 2021 showing that even at rest, the highly sensitive brain doesn't quiet down the way others do. The precuneus hippocampus circuit, which handles episodic memory consolidation and spontaneous memory retrieval, stays unusually active. The brain keeps processing, keeps filing, keeps connecting. It's running a background scan even when there's nothing on the screen. Their mirror neuron areas also fire more intensely. These regions, apparently found only in primates and humans, facilitate empathy, so when someone across the table is masking sadness, the highly sensitive brain doesn't just notice, it feels. The insula, sometimes called the seat of consciousness, lights up too, pulling together thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and bodily states into one continuous, unrelenting feed. Here's where it gets complicated. A 2011 study out of SUNY Downstate Medical Center, led by Dr. Jeremy Copland, assessed 44 participants, 26 diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and 18 without. Those with GAD scored higher on both worry and IQ. The anxious group was smarter and more miserable simultaneously. Copeland's explanation was blunt. He said worry may cause our species to avoid dangerous situations regardless of how remote a possibility they may be. In essence, worry may make people take no chances, and such people may have higher survival rates. So intelligence and anxiety may have co-evolved. Your brain got sharper, but the price was a mind that wouldn't stop rehearsing catastrophes. A 2018 survey of Mensa members put this into sharper relief. 20% reported suffering from an anxiety disorder. Nearly 27% experienced a mood disorder. These are people who scored in the top 2% of intelligence tests, and roughly a quarter of them were clinically struggling. Researchers at Hungary's Semmelweis University added a genetic layer in 2009 when they found that a gene called neuregulin 1, previously known almost solely for increasing susceptibility to schizophrenia, was also connected to creative genius, madness, and brilliance, sharing a zip code in the genome. Sweden's Karolinska Institute found in 2014 that writers were 121% more likely to suffer from bipolar disorder compared to the general population, and nearly 50% more likely to commit suicide. Edvard Munch described the moment that inspired the scream as a hallucination during a walk. He felt tired and ill, stopped, looked out over the fjord, watched the clouds turn blood red, and sensed a scream passing through nature. A former colleague of Abraham Lincoln said his melancholy dripped from him as he walked. There's a concept called the centipede effect. It captures the disconnect between instinct and action. The centipede has 100 legs and moves beautifully until someone asks it which leg goes first. Then it can't move at all because it's focused on the parts instead of the intelligence of the whole system. Management professor H. Igor Ansoff formalized this in 1965 when he coined the phrase paralysis by analysis in a strategy textbook. A 2018 global survey by McKinsey found that only 20% of respondents felt their organizations excelled excelled at decision-making. 61% admitted that most of their decision-making time was used ineffectively. For a Fortune 500 company, this translated to over 530,000 employee days lost per year, an estimated $250 million in labor costs burned on indecision. But this isn't just corporate. Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper published their landmark JAM study in 2000, demonstrating that shoppers presented with more options were significantly less likely to buy anything. More awareness of possibilities led to fewer decisions. More information led to more paralysis. One study of Israeli parole judges found the likelihood of granting parole dropped to around 10% just before lunch and rose to around 65% shortly after. The researcher's summary was elegant. A hungry brain is a grumpy brain. Even the gatekeepers of justice couldn't outthink their own fatigue. If any of this sounds familiar, not as theory, but as the texture of a Tuesday afternoon, then you already know the feeling. You know what it's like to lie in bed and replay a conversation from 6 hours ago, noticing the exact moment someone's tone shifted by half a degree. You know what it's like to understand precisely why you're anxious, and have that understanding change absolutely nothing. Robin Bailey, working in metacognitive research, put it this way: how a person thinks may be more important than what a person thinks. The problem isn't what you're aware of, it's that awareness itself became the loop. That's the paradox. Understanding yourself deeply doesn't bring relief. Instead, it creates pressure, overthinking, and emotional fatigue. And I sat in that coffee shop watching a barista's hand tremble, knowing full well that noticing wouldn't help either of us. A study published in Discover Psychology in April 2024 found that social media platforms, originally praised for raising mental health awareness, have paradoxically become breeding grounds for hyperawareness. Healthy and natural negative emotions like stress and sadness are now frequently misinterpreted as pathological symptoms. The researchers described a feedback loop. Labeling normal mild distress as a disorder affects self-concept, which worsens symptoms over time. Interpreting ordinary anxiety as indicative of an anxiety disorder leads to avoidance, which amplifies the anxiety, which fuels more awareness efforts. The snake eating its own tail while Googling why snakes eat their tails. A 2012 study published in Frontiers in Evolutionary Neuroscience suggested that excessive worry, the tendency to overthink, might be an evolutionary legacy. Anticipating threats and imagining complex scenarios could have helped our ancestors survive. But in modern life, where threats are psychological rather than physical, this mental machinery backfires. You're running survival software in a world where the danger is a passive-aggressive email. 2023 research published in Frontiers in Neuroscience measured EEG signatures of sensory processing sensitivity and found that during resting states with eyes open, highly sensitive people exhibit higher brain activity, suggesting increased information processing. They performed better on visual search tasks but reported higher stress afterward. The Semmelweis team called it working memory in overdrive. The engine runs hotter, processes faster, and burns through fuel at a rate the chassis wasn't designed for. Dr. Adrian Wells and Gerald Matthews developed the self-regulatory executive function model to describe exactly this mechanism. The cognitive attentional syndrome, as they named it, involves rumination, worry, heightened self-focused attention, threat monitoring, and dysfunctional coping strategies like avoidance and thought suppression. Each strategy intended to reduce distress prolongs it instead. Sigmund Freud turned to cocaine to quiet his own anxious mind, noting he took it in small doses against depression and against indigestion with the most brilliant success. That's perhaps the most Freud sentence ever written, a man trying to self-medicate his way out of his own awareness, calling it brilliant. The rest of us just stare at flickering fluorescent lights in coffee shops. My book is still open to that same page. The barista's hand probably stopped trembling hours ago. I wouldn't know. I'd already moved on to cataloging the exact shade of discomfort on the face of a stranger who had nothing to do with me, carrying it home like always, setting it down nowhere.